Ethan Reed wasn't supposed to be there. Billionaires didn't usually drive themselves home after midnight, especially not through the rough end of downtown. But tonight, he needed air, the kind that hurt to breathe, the kind that made you feel something real. The board meeting had gone well. The numbers were perfect, yet everything in his life still felt cold. When he first noticed her, the girl he almost drove past. She was young, maybe 18, her hair tangled under the dim streetlight. Her thin sweater was soaked, her shoes torn. She didn't even flinch when his tires splashed through the slush near her feet. Something about that stillness hit him. He rolled down his window. "Hey," he said softly, his voice fogging in the cold air. "Are you okay?" The girl blinked, like she hadn't heard a voice in hours. "I'm fine," she whispered, her breath barely visible. Ethan frowned. "You don't look fine." Her gaze shifted, cautious, defensive. "Please, just go." He hesitated. Then, something inside him, maybe guilt, maybe instinct, told him not to. "I can't leave you here. It's below freezing." She gave a weak, disbelieving laugh. "You don't even know me." "No," he said quietly, "but I don't need to." He parked, grabbed his coat, and approached her slowly. The snow crunched under his boots. She tried to stand but stumbled. He caught her before she fell. Her skin was ice cold. "Come on," he murmured. "Let's get you warm." Inside his car, she sat stiff, like a fragile thing that might break if touched. He turned on the heat to full blast. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lily," she said after a pause. "Lily Moore." "I'm Ethan." She gave a faint nod, eyes fixed on the dashboard lights like they were the only stars she'd ever seen. The ride was silent except for the hum of the engine. She watched the city fade away, replaced by tall buildings and clean sidewalks, another world. When he stopped in front of a sleek penthouse building, she froze. "I can't go in there," she said quickly. "I don't belong." He turned to her. "You belong somewhere safe tonight. That's enough." The warmth inside the building made her dizzy. The elevator ride felt like floating. When the doors opened, she gasped. The walls were glass, the lights golden, and a fire flickered quietly in the corner. "Sit," Ethan said gently. "I'll get you something dry." She hesitated, then lowered herself onto the couch, her fingers tracing the edge of a blanket like it was made of magic. He returned with clothes, a towel, and a bowl of hot soup. "You didn't have to do this," she murmured, her eyes downcast. "Maybe I did," he said softly. Lily's lips trembled. "Why? Why help someone like me?" He smiled faintly. "Because someone once did the same for me." For the first time, she looked up, curious, almost hopeful. But he didn't say more. Not yet. Hours passed. The city outside slept, and for a moment, so did her fear. When Ethan walked to the window, he caught his reflection, the expensive suit, the penthouse skyline behind him, and wondered if kindness had an expiration date. He remembered being young, lost, and rescued by a stranger once. Maybe that was why her presence hurt so much. It reminded him of who he used to be before money built walls around him. Behind him, Lily had fallen asleep under the blanket. Her hand clutched a torn piece of paper, maybe a note, maybe a memory. Ethan didn't ask. He simply turned off the light and whispered to the quiet room, "You're safe now." Morning came softly, pale light spilling through the tall windows, turning the frost outside into rivers of gold. Lily stirred on the couch, disoriented. The smell of coffee and toast filled the air, a scent she hadn't felt in months. For a moment, she didn't move, afraid that opening her eyes might make it all disappear. Ethan stood by the counter, already dressed, sleeves rolled, his tie hanging loose. He looked less like a billionaire and more like someone who'd been awake thinking too much. When he saw her sit up, he smiled gently. "Good morning," he said. "You were out cold. I hope you're feeling better." Lily blinked, brushing her messy hair from her face. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I didn't mean to fall asleep here." "You don't have to apologize," Ethan replied. "You needed rest." He placed a plate in front of her, eggs, toast, fruit. It was simple, but her hand shook just looking at it. "Eat," he said softly. "Please." Her first bite made her eyes sting. She hadn't realized how hungry she was. Ethan sat across from her, watching without judgment, without pity, just quiet understanding. After a while, she whispered, "You really didn't have to do this." He smiled faintly. "You keep saying that." "Because it's true. People don't help like this. Not anymore." "Maybe they should." Lily looked down, swallowing hard. "Why me?" Ethan leaned back, his gaze distant. "Because I saw myself in you. A long time ago, I had nowhere to go either." Her fork paused midday. "You?" He nodded slowly. "My parents died when I was 15. I slept in bus stations, parks, even construction sites. One night, a man found me, freezing, and brought me to his shop, fed me, gave me clothes. He didn't ask for anything. That one act changed everything." Lily's voice was barely a whisper. "What happened to him?" Ethan exhaled, the memory heavy in his chest. "He passed away before I could repay him. I built my company years later, but I never forgot him. I guess this is my way of keeping his kindness alive." Her eyes glistened. "That's beautiful." A silence fell between them, not awkward, but meaningful, the kind that said two souls had recognized each other's pain. Lily hesitated, then reached into her torn bag. She pulled out a small envelope, creased and fragile. "This is all I have left," she murmured. "My mother's letter. She wrote it before she died." Ethan froze. "What does it say?" "She told me not to lose hope," Lily said softly. "That someday someone would help me, not because they had to, but because they wanted to." Ethan's throat tightened. She was right. For a moment, time slowed. The world outside didn't matter. Not the noise, not the money, not the endless rush of success. Just this, two people, broken differently but healing the same way. The clock ticked softly in the background. Ethan cleared his throat. "Do you have anyone else? Family? Friends?" Lily shook her head. "No one. After Mom died, I was in foster care for a while. Then things just fell apart." He nodded slowly, then spoke with quiet resolve. "You don't have to go back out there tonight. Stay here until we figure something out." Her eyes widened. "You mean, stay here? With you?" "Temporarily," he said with a small smile. "Until we find a better plan." Tears welled up in her eyes. "Why are you so kind?" Ethan hesitated. "Because too many people stopped being kind when the world needed it most." She covered her face with her hands and cried, not loud, but the kind of cry that comes from finally feeling safe. He didn't move closer. He just let her cry. Because sometimes silence was the truest form of comfort. As the day faded, Ethan walked to his office to make some calls. He didn't notice Lily standing at the door, watching him, the man who'd given her warmth when the world had given her nothing. In her heart, she promised herself that somehow she'd repay this stranger who saw her not as a burden, but as a person. Outside, the snow began again, light, slow, almost gentle this time. That evening, Ethan's penthouse felt different. The quiet wasn't lonely anymore. It was alive, soft, threaded with something unfamiliar. Lily sat by the window, wearing one of his old sweaters that nearly swallowed her frame. She looked out at the city lights, tiny reflections dancing in her eyes. He brought her a mug of hot chocolate, setting it on the table beside her. "You're thinking about her," he said gently. Lily nodded. "Every night. I still hear her voice sometimes. She used to say that life is a funny way of testing you before it blesses you." She smiled faintly. "Guess I'm still waiting for the blessing part." Ethan leaned against the railing, arms crossed. "Maybe it's already here, just in disguise." Her eyes flicked toward him, unsure whether to believe that. "You talk like someone who's lived 1,000 lives." He chuckled softly. "Feels like it some days." They shared a quiet laugh, and for a fleeting second, the weight of their past didn't feel so heavy. Later that night, as the fire crackled, Ethan brought out an old photo album. He hadn't opened it in years. The pages smelled faintly of time and dust. He showed her a picture, a teenage boy sitting beside a smiling shop owner. "That's him," Ethan said. "Mr. Carter. He owned a small garage. Taught me how to fix engines, how to be honest, how to stay humble, even when life gave you nothing. Lily traced a photo with her finger. He looks kind. He was, Ethan replied quietly. When I finally built my company, I named it after him. Carter Industries. Most people think it's just a random name, but it's a promise. Lily looked up, admiration softening her features. He'd be proud of you. Ethan gave a small, bittersweet smile. I hope so. The night wore on. Lily told him about the shelters she'd drifted through, the people she'd met, some kind, some cruel. Ethan listened, every word pulling at something inside him he thought he'd buried. When she spoke of her mother's last day, her voice trembled. She was sick. We didn't have money for medicine. I held her hand until she stopped breathing, and I just kept talking, pretending she was still there. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. He wanted to comfort her, but all he could say was, I'm sorry. She nodded slowly. Everyone says that, but you're the first person who sounds like they mean it. The fire popped softly, scattering small sparks like fleeting memories. He watched her for a while longer, then said, You know, I think you're stronger than you realize. She smiled weakly. Strong doesn't keep you warm. Maybe not, he said, but it keeps you alive long enough to find warmth again. Her gaze softened, and for the first time, she didn't look like a stranger in his home. She looked like someone who belonged. The next morning, Ethan found a note on the kitchen counter in her handwriting. Thank you for giving me warmth when I had nothing but cold. I'm going out for a walk. I'll be back soon. But the day stretched into night, and she didn't return. Ethan tried to focus on his meetings, but his mind wouldn't stay still. Every time he glanced at the clock, his chest grew tighter. He called her name down the hallway, checked the building lobby, even drove around downtown where he'd first seen her. Nothing. By midnight, snow was falling again. He parked the car, walking through the same frozen streets, scanning every shadow. Finally, near an old train station, he saw her, sitting on a bench, clutching her small bag, tears streaking down her face. Lily, he called, rushing over. She looked up, startled. I didn't mean to worry you, she said softly. I didn't know if I deserved to stay. He knelt in front of her, breath visible in the cold. You do. You hear me? You do. Her voice cracked. You've done too much already. I didn't want to be another person who takes and disappears. You're not taking, Ethan said firmly. You're healing. And sometimes healing looks like staying. For a moment, neither spoke. Snow gathered in her hair, the night swallowing the noise of the city. Come home, he whispered. And this time, she didn't argue. She nodded, slow, uncertain, but hopeful. As they walked back together, Ethan felt something shift inside him. Maybe this wasn't about charity. Maybe it was about fate. Two broken stories finding the courage to write a new one. The next few days felt lighter. Lily began to smile, not often, but enough for Ethan to notice. She helped around the apartment, folded the laundry he'd left in piles, brewed coffee before he woke up. Small things, quiet gestures. Every morning, when Ethan left for work, she'd wave from the balcony, her hair glowing in the sunlight like a fragile promise. Ethan hadn't realized how empty his life had become until now. The laughter that echoed through his once silent home felt like oxygen. He'd spent years chasing success, but this warmth, this simple human noise, it filled spaces that money couldn't touch. One evening, he found her sitting at the grand piano in the corner of his living room. She wasn't playing, just tracing the keys. You play? He asked. Lily turned, startled. Not really. My mom used to. I just like the sound. He smiled. Try it. She hesitated, then pressed a single key. The note lingered, soft and trembling. Then another. Within moments, her hand began to remember. A quiet melody rose, uneven but beautiful, like a story. Ethan leaned against the doorway, eyes closed, letting it wash over him. When she stopped, he said quietly, That's the most peace this place has had in years. She blushed faintly. You should really dust the piano more often. He laughed, an honest, unguarded laugh that surprised even him. As days turned into weeks, their connection deepened. Not romantic, not yet, but something more sacred. A bond formed out of gratitude and shared loneliness. One afternoon, Ethan received an unexpected call. Mr. Reed, his assistant, said, "The charity board wants you to speak at next month's fundraiser. They are highlighting homelessness relief this year." He paused. "Homelessness?" "Yes, sir. Would you like me to confirm?" Ethan looked across the room, where Lily was sketching by the window. "Yes," he said quietly. "Confirm it." That night, he told her. "They asked me to speak about homelessness," he said, setting his coffee aside. "I think maybe you could help me write it. You've lived what I can only imagine." Her pen froze mid-sketch. "You want me to help you?" "I want you to help me tell the truth," he replied. Lily bit her lip, unsure. "I don't think my story belongs on a stage." "Your story is the stage," Ethan said softly. "People need to see what kindness can do, how one act can change everything." Her eyes welled up. "But what if they pity me?" "They won't," he said firmly. "Because you're not a story of pity, Lily. You're a story of strength." For a long moment, she stared at him, something shifting behind her gaze, disbelief melting into trust. She nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll help." That night, they sat together on the couch, writing. Lily spoke and Ethan typed, her words flowing raw and unfiltered. She talked about hunger, cold nights, the strangers who looked away. But she also spoke of her mother's letter, the one that told her hope would find her. Ethan typed every word carefully, his chest tightening with every sentence. When she finished, she whispered, "Maybe that letter was meant for both of us." He met her eyes, voice quiet. "Maybe it was." As midnight drew near, they laughed over silly typos and the way Ethan kept misspelling compassion. For the first time in years, he didn't dread tomorrow. A week later, the night of the fundraiser arrived. The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers, the air thick with perfume and polite conversation. Ethan adjusted his tie nervously. Lily stood beside him, dressed in a simple blue gown he'd insisted on buying her. She looked radiant, not because of the dress, but because of the quiet strength behind her smile. When it was his turn to speak, the room fell silent. Ethan stepped onto the stage, glanced at Lily in the front row, and began. He spoke not as a billionaire, but as a man who remembered what it felt like to be cold, lost, unseen. He told them about the girl he'd found on a winter night, how her courage reminded him of humanity's forgotten heartbeat. And when he finished, the applause wasn't loud, it was long. Tears glistened in Lily's eyes as she stood, clapping. Ethan caught her gaze and nodded, silently thanking her for helping him rediscover who he was. That night, she slipped a folded note into her pocket, one she'd been writing secretly. "If that moment hit you hard, leave a red heart hash. Sometimes one little symbol says what our hearts can't." After the fundraiser, something shifted, not just in Ethan, but in everyone who'd heard his words. Donations poured in, and people from across the city reached out, offering support, jobs, shelter spaces. Ethan's company became known not just for its innovation, but for its heart. Yet, amid the noise of recognition, there was one person who kept him grounded, Lily. She had blossomed. Her laughter filled the penthouse. Her presence anchored him in ways he hadn't expected. But one morning, as Ethan prepared for work, he noticed her by the window again, holding that same old letter from her mother. Her expression was distant, thoughtful, almost haunted. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "Yeah, I keep thinking about her. Everything I do, I wonder if she'd be proud." "She would," Ethan said gently. "She'd see how strong you become." Lily smiled faintly but didn't look convinced. "You gave me that strength," she whispered. Ethan shook his head. "No, you already had it. I just reminded you it was there." That day passed quietly, until evening. When Ethan returned home, he found Lily sitting on the couch, holding a small envelope. It wasn't the old one. It was new. His name was written across it. "What's that?" he asked. Her eyes lifted slowly, filled with something he couldn't quite read. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice trembling. but I don't know how. Ethan sat beside her. Whatever it is, just say it. She took a deep breath. The night you found me, it wasn't the first time I saw you. He frowned slightly. What do you mean? I used to sit near your office building, she said quietly. You drive by every night in that same car. I didn't know who you were, but you looked lonely, like someone carrying too much. Ethan's heart stuttered. You were there. She nodded. I didn't plan for you to stop that night. I thought people like you never noticed people like me. But you did, and that's why I wrote this. She handed him the envelope. I didn't mean for you to read it now, but maybe you should. Ethan opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper, filled with her neat handwriting. Dear Ethan, if you're reading this, it means I finally had the courage to tell you what I've been holding back. That night, when you offered me shelter, you didn't just save my life, you gave it meaning again. I realized something. Your kindness wasn't random. It was destiny returning the favor. You once said someone saved you when you were lost. Maybe I was sent to remind you that the good you give always finds its way home. Ethan's eyes blurred before he reached the last line. You're not just a man who rescued me. You're the reason I still believe in love, in people, in tomorrow. He lowered the letter slowly, the words sinking deep into his chest. Lily. But she wasn't crying. She just smiled softly, tears shimmering at the corners of her eyes. I needed you to know that, because tomorrow I'm leaving. He froze. What? I found a place, she said, voice trembling. A program for young women. They help with education and jobs. I applied, and they accepted me. It's a chance to build a life, Ethan, a real one. He wanted to argue, to say she could stay, that she didn't have to go. But the truth caught in his throat. This was what he'd wanted for her. Freedom, not dependency. I'm proud of you, he finally said, his voice breaking. So proud. Lily smiled through her tears. You once said kindness doesn't have an expiration date. I think you were right. Yours, it'll stay with me forever. They sat in silence for a while, words hanging unspoken between them. Gratitude, love, and the ache of goodbye. Later that night, Ethan stood by the window after she'd gone to her room. Her letter lay open on the table, and he whispered to himself, You saved me too, Lily. Outside, the city lights blurred like falling stars, and for the first time, he didn't feel alone in them. The morning Lily left, the city seemed quieter than usual. Even the sky felt muted. A pale gray stretched endlessly over the skyline. Ethan stood by the elevator as she adjusted the strap of her small backpack, her fingers trembling slightly. She was trying to smile, but her eyes betrayed the sadness beneath. You don't have to walk me down, she said softly. I know, Ethan replied, voice low, but I want to. They rode the elevator in silence, the faint hum of machinery filling the gap where words should have been. When the doors opened, the lobby light spilled over them like the closing scene of a movie. At the door, she turned to him. Thank you for everything. For seeing me. He swallowed hard. You don't owe me thanks. Just promise me something. Never stop believing in the good you carry. She nodded, eyes glassy. I won't. Then she was gone, her figure dissolving into the morning fog, leaving behind the faint scent of warmth and cocoa that lingered in the halls long after she'd left. Ethan stood there for a long time, hands in his pockets, heart heavier than he cared to admit. The penthouse that once echoed with laughter now felt hollow again. Days turned into weeks. The coffee mug stayed untouched. The piano gathered dust. And yet, every time Ethan looked out the window, he caught himself half expecting to see her walking back through those glass doors, the girl who'd turned his world right side up again. One evening, as the sunset poured golden light across the city, a letter arrived. The envelope was cream-colored, her handwriting instantly recognizable. His hands trembled as he opened it. Dear Ethan, I hope you're doing well. The program is wonderful. They've given me a small apartment and a job at a community arts center. Every morning I wake up and think of what you told me, that kindness doesn't have an expiration date. I'm learning to live by that. I play the piano here sometimes. It makes me feel close to the home you gave me when I had none. You changed my life, Ethan, But I think the real truth is you reminded me to change it myself. He read it twice, then 3 times, each line pressing deeper into his chest. Her words carried both distance and closeness, pain and peace. But there was more, a second page. I met someone here, a woman named Grace. She runs the shelter that saved me this time. Funny, isn't it? I used to think being rescued meant being weak. Now I see it just means being human enough to accept help when you need it. I told Grace about you. She said people like you are rare. I think she's right. At the bottom, her final words glimmered like a whisper through the paper. If our paths cross again someday, I hope it's not because either of us is lost, but because we both found where we belong. Ethan sat back in his chair, tears pricking his eyes. He folded the letter carefully, placed it inside the same drawer that held a photo of Mr. Carter. And for the first time since he left, he smiled. Not because he missed her less, but because he finally understood something she had taught him. Letting go was also an act of love. He began to visit shelters again, not as a donor, but as a listener. He'd sit with people, share stories, offer warmth the way it had once been offered to him. And sometimes, when he saw someone young and lost, he'd hear Lily's voice echoing softly in his mind. Kindness doesn't need to be remembered, just repeated. Months passed. Winter melted into spring, and the city bloomed again. But one snowy evening, nearly a year later, he returned home to find an envelope waiting on his doorstep. Same handwriting, same careful loops. Inside was a photograph. Lily stood in front of a small building with a bright blue sign. Moore Haven, a shelter for the lost. On the back, in her handwriting, were 6 simple words. You were right. Hope always returns. Ethan sat in silence, the world blurring around him. That's when he realized this was a full circle. The cold night, the stranger, the letter, it was all one long heartbeat of humanity. He looked out at the snowfall beyond his window and whispered, You did it, Lily. And somehow, it felt like she heard. Months drifted into another winter, and the snow returned, softer this time, almost merciful. Ethan stood on the balcony, a mug of coffee in his hands, watching the city breathe under its white blanket. Somewhere out there, Lily was building something beautiful. Moore Haven. Even the name sounded like light breaking through clouds. He hadn't seen her since that last letter, but her presence lingered in quiet ways. The piano she once played, the folded blanket she'd left behind, the way her laughter still seemed to echo in the corners of the penthouse when he wasn't paying attention. That morning, he received a call from a journalist. Mr. Reed, we're covering a story on Moore Haven, the new shelter for homeless youth. Its founder mentioned you as her inspiration. Would you be willing to comment? Ethan's heart skipped. She mentioned me. Yes, sir, she said. And I quote, A man once gave me warmth when the world gave me cold. I just want to pass that warmth forward. He didn't respond for a moment. The journalist waited. Finally, Ethan said softly, Tell her she succeeded. That night, he drove to Moore Haven. The building stood quietly at the edge of downtown, modest, clean, alive with light. Through the window, he could see people sitting at tables, laughing, eating. And there, near the piano, was Lily, her hair tied back, her smile steady. He didn't go in. Not yet. He just stood across the street, watching. She was exactly as he remembered her, but stronger, like all the storms she'd endured had finally turned into roots. Lily turned slightly, as if sensing something. Her gaze drifted toward the window, and for a fleeting second, their eyes met. A quiet recognition passed between them. No words, no gestures, just a shared understanding that some connections don't fade. They transform. Then she smiled, the kind of smile that said, You did your part. Now let me do mine. Ethan smiled back, tears glistening in the corners of his eyes. He whispered to the night, She found her home. He drove back slowly, the city lights blurring into gold and silver streaks. Somewhere between traffic lights, his mind wandered to the past, to Mr. Carter, to the night he'd stopped his car for a stranger, to the girl who'd taught him what giving truly meant. Every act of kindness, he realized, was a ripple that never really stopped moving. Back at his apartment, Ethan sat by the window with his laptop open. He began to type, Not business plans this time, but something personal. A book. A story. The title came to him without effort. The Night Hope Knocked Back. It wasn't about wealth, or success, or charity. It was about connection, the invisible thread that ties one heart to another, even through the darkest winters. He wrote for hours, and in every chapter, Lily lived, not as a victim, but as the embodiment of what happens when kindness is given room to grow. When the manuscript was done, he printed one copy and mailed it. No return address, no note, just a book, to Moore Haven. Weeks later, an envelope arrived at his door. Inside was a small card. Lily's handwriting again. I read every page. It made me cry, and then smile. You gave me a beginning when I thought I'd reach my end. Thank you, Ethan, for reminding the world that even broken things can build something whole. Ethan sat with the card pressed against his chest. Outside, snow was falling again, the same snow that once carried a frightened girl into his life. Only this time, it didn't feel cold. It felt sacred. The next morning, he visited Mr. Carter's grave, something he hadn't done in years. He brushed off the snow from the headstone and placed Lily's letter beside it. She's out there doing what you did for me, he murmured. Guess the lesson never dies, huh? A breeze swept past, lifting the corner of the letter just enough for him to see the word hope written in her delicate script. He smiled through the chill. Yeah, he whispered, hope always finds its way. A year later, the world had changed again, brighter, slower, and somehow gentler. The name Moore Haven had become known far beyond their city. Newspapers called it a shelter built from love, and interviews praised its young founder for her courage and heart. But for Ethan, it wasn't the fame that mattered. It was the fact that Lily had kept her promise. She had become the warmth she once needed. On a crisp December afternoon, Ethan found himself standing outside the shelter once more, this time with a box of books under his arm. Inside, children laughed in the common room, volunteers served soup, and the faint sound of a piano played somewhere deeper in the building. That melody, he'd know it anywhere. Lily looked up from the piano bench when she saw him. Surprise flickered across her face, then softened into a smile. You came, she said, standing to meet him. I had to see what hope looks like, he replied, smiling. She laughed, a sound full of light. Then you came to the right place. He handed her the box. For your library, stories of second chances. Lily looked down at the books, her eyes glistening. You always bring gifts that aren't things, she whispered. He shrugged. Old habit. Learn from good teachers. For a moment, they stood quietly, watching the children play. The world around them hummed with life, laughter, footsteps, music, the perfect symphony of healing. Then Lily said softly, Do you ever think about that night? All the time, Ethan admitted. It taught me something I'll never forget, that saving someone doesn't always mean pulling them from the dark. Sometimes it's just sitting beside them until they see the light again. Lily smiled. That's exactly what you did. He hesitated, then asked, And you? Did you ever forgive the world for what it took from you? She looked out the window, where snow was beginning to fall again. I did, she said, because it gave me you, and through you, I found myself. Ethan's chest tightened with emotion. There were 1,000 things he could have said, but none felt big enough to hold a moment. So he simply nodded. Later that evening, they stood outside the shelter as the first snowflakes touched the ground. The streetlights glowed soft and golden. Lily turned to him, her voice gentle but steady. You know, she said, my mother's letter. I used to think it was about hope finding me, but now I realize it was about me becoming hope for someone else. Ethan's eyes glistened. She'd be proud. So am I. She smiled through her tears. You taught me that every act of kindness echoes. It doesn't end. It multiplies. They stood there in the cold, not needing words. The silence between them was full of everything they'd lost, everything they'd found, and everything they'd become. When she finally spoke again, her voice trembled. Ethan, can I ask you something? Anything. If you could go back to that night, when you saw me by the cafe, would you still stop? He smiled softly, eyes glinting with warmth. Every single time. Tears slipped down her cheeks, glistening under the streetlight. Then I guess we were both saved that night. He reached out, not to hold her, but to rest a hand gently on her shoulder. No, he whispered, we were both found. The wind swirled around them, carrying the faint sound of laughter from inside. It was a sound that promised life goes on, and it gets better. Before leaving, Ethan turned back one last time. Lily stood at the doorway, watching him with that same brave smile she'd worn the first night she found safety in his world. He waved, and she waved back. As he walked away, her voice called softly after him, "Don't forget to play the piano sometimes." He laughed, "Only if you promise to keep changing the world." "Deal," she said, and the door closed gently behind her. Ethan looked up at the sky, the same kind of cold night that had once brought two souls together. But this time, the cold didn't feel cruel. It felt clean, new. He whispered into the falling snow. "Mr. Carter," she carried it forward. "You were right. Kindness never dies." And somewhere inside that small shelter, a melody played again, the same one Lily had once played in his living room. Only now, it belonged to everyone. The story that began with a cold night ended with warmth that would never fade.